Hello everyone, today I'm going to be taking a look at a new rule set from Studio Tomahawk to replay skirmishes in World War II as I check out V for Victory. Okay, so this is V for Victory, the World War II skirmish rule set from Studio Tomahawk. Also potentially 5 for Victory, which we'll get into with the mechanics in a little while. The book itself is a hardback book. And inside this book you will find everything you need to know to play out your games. This is essentially the only thing you need to buy, although I'll get into some of the other bits later on. But it is self-contained currently for several of the armies. So, start off with the index and contents. Split up as you would expect into fairly standard format. What you need to play, your basic rules, your forces, the cards, activations, all of that. How the game progresses and then finishes up with orders of battle and scenarios. So, first off, the writing on the book and the layout is excellent, as you can see here. Lovely full colour artwork, or not artwork, full colour photographs of in-field action shots, shall we say. The second thing is the book is a mix of interesting facts and concepts with a little dash of fun thrown in every now and again. So, for example, in this briefing, and most of them begin with a quote from a notable of the period. It gives you a little idea about the concept of lethality. There are 2 different types of fire: direct fire to cause casualties and suppressing fire. And they say that the casualties in the ranks are proportionally less frequent, and there are 2 reasons for the choice in this system to go that way. First off is the official Ministry of Defence statistics from Britain after the war that showed that only 10% of casualties inflicted during the Second World War were down to bullets and small arms. The other 90% came from artillery fire, sickness, accidents, whatever it happens to be. So there was roughly a casualty rate of 45,000 bullets fired from small arms for every single casualty inflicted, which is massive. So they focused on erosion of morale as a concept, which is very good. And I like that they explained why that comes in there as well. The other thing is you'll occasionally see little sort of notes from people like Captain Miller that are somewhat hilarious. For example, the Panzer Cats, or what happens when a tabby cat jumps up on your table and knocks everything going. So, yes. So, after that, you get your basic training, what you need to use, and the concept of the 5 for Victory. Your successes are always 5 or more on a dice, and the modifiers are to the dice themselves. And very briefly to explain that, you have a concept of burning and boosting dice. So the game uses D6, D8, and D12. And when you look at the chances of rolling a 5 or a 6, or 5 or more, let's say, on each die type, on a D6, it's a third. So 33% of the time you'll be successful. On a D8, it's 50-50. So half the time you'll be successful. And on a D12, rolling 5 or more is going to happen 2/3 of the time. So you get a nice progression: third, half, and 2/3. That's why they skipped the D10, because the percentile difference between a D8 and a D10 is negligible, whereas this gives a very nice smooth arc. When you fire a weapon, the weapon will have a specific die type assigned to it, and essentially, I'll do this off the book so it might be a bit easier to see. When you start with your dice, depending on various modifiers, so perhaps you're firing something like a rifle, and for the sake of argument, we'll say a rifle uses 2d8. You will have boosts for things like being elite, and then burns for cover or morale, stress on the unit that's firing, things like that. And you always pick the highest die type you have and affect it first when you're burning. So in the case of this, if we had one burn to do to the firing, you would swap one d6 or in place of a d8, and then you would just roll those and attempt to get 5 or more. That's one success. When you have multiple die type, you still affect specific ones. So if you're going up, you're picking the lowest, and if you're going down, you're picking the highest die to affect. When you hit the point where you can't lower it any further because you're at a d6, you remove dice until you get down to 1. And then when you hit 1 and have to apply further burns, so negative modifiers, you actually roll 2 dice and pick the worst result. So in this case, neither would hit. And likewise, when you're going up the way, you hit a point where you've got a d12, and instead of adding another d12, you add a single d6 to it, and you can't get higher than that. So your maximum boost would be both of these. In this case, the 12 would be successful. In the case of dice rolling, it's all very standardized, which is good because it means you can get into the game in short order, where you're not having to think about modifiers for individual types of attacks and the like. All you're thinking about is how many dice you're rolling, and then looking for what way they're going to be affected. The game itself is run off cards, which I'll talk a lot more about at the end. And then the movement is based on the very familiar system of sticks that you would see in things like Saga, for example. So you have a very short, a medium, and a long. They do equate to roughly 30 centimeters for the long, and I think it's 15 centimeters for a medium. So when you move, you're moving only your leader. So you measure very quickly, leader to spot to spot. They can move up to a certain distance, and then after that, you then deploy the rest of the unit around them. Now, you can deploy further forward, which just means you're more likely to be shot, because while your measurements for your movement are done from your leader, any model in the unit is a viable target. So it's just a way of speeding up gameplay and moving. Firing is broken into spotting. Spotting is very simple. You start with a 3L range, so roughly 90 centimeters. And then you apply modifiers to what you're targeting. So are they in cover? Are you on the ground with stress on you? Is there a scenario special effect in play? Is the weather, or is it nighttime? And then these will modify the distance you can see up and down. And then after that, you'll have a firing range for your weapon. But if you can't see them, you're not going to be rolling dice. If I flick on a bit here, after the spotting and firing, it does go into the weapon types and then also vehicle firing and movement as well. So it's all very concisely explained. There are unit tactics, which can be used for various things, including artillery, I suppose, not artillery pieces, but anti-tank heavy weapons that can be limbered and unlimbered and moving them around. We have the vehicle rules. Again, there are vehicles in the game. They are obviously the choice of whether or not you want to use them in your support. We have our terrain rules, and then we have our orders of battle. Now, this is where things get interesting, for me at least. So, when you are coming to play a game of V for Victory, you will decide on your nation of choice. So, let's say we go for something like the British. Actually, we'll go for the Germans because I'm there. So you pick an Orbat to choose from. So you can pick your mechanized infantry, your standard infantry list, an assault infantry or an airborne infantry. Each of the nations has 4 sort of Orbats that they can choose from. And once you choose that, it grants you your core force automatically. So here you would have a headquarter squad and then 2 squads that are identical because they're overlapping like this, each consisting of an SMG, NCO, an LMG and 2 riflemen, and then an SMG, NCO and 4 riflemen. There are some that are greyed out. This is because while the full unit might be that on paper, that is generally, well, not generally, that is what you're gifted in this list. And it's the same for the other units as well. Essentially, you're dealing with the difference between paper strength of a battalion or regiment or company and what they actually were able to physically field. So it's rare that you would have full units. Now, that can be compensated for when it comes to your support, which are the star ratings. So you can, for example, buy in 3 reinforcements for the cost of 1 star. And what you do is you fill out whatever squads you want with those. You're buying 3, you get 3. Even if you only have 2 spots that you want to fill or that you can fill, the third man is lost, essentially. So the game works a little bit differently than some others in that they suggest you decide what you're going to be playing, and then you come to your scenarios. And then the scenario will determine what your objectives are. And then you have your other information here. Now, there are 10 scenarios in the book. So if we look at every objective counts. In this scenario, you'll find something that's more familiar from the sort of basic encounter. So this introduces vehicles as well and control of different objectives. It tells you what the initiative is. So who's starting, how many turns the game is going to last, and then the format in stars. This has an X star rating, and underneath it tells you you're going to be either playing 6 or 10 stars. Also, if there's any bonus cards or special rules are in here as well, and then the deployment and the game mechanics. And the way they suggest you play the game is you decide your scenario, you set up the table for your scenario, and then you go back to your Orbat and you go, right, I need to hold objectives. Any enemy vehicles that are eliminated, you score half their star value in rating. And I know how the table is laid out. I know the terrain I'm going into. So you don't actually build your army list until you've got your mission and you know the territory. And then it's very quick to list build with this because you're just going, right, I've got 6 to spend. A medium mortar team is going to be 2. A medium machine gun is going to be 1. An additional squad is 3. Well, there's my 6 already. And then add that to your core command and squads, and that's what you're playing with. Or maybe you want to add an anti-tank team because you know you're going to be taking on vehicles. So one of those, you have a very basic breakdown. It tells you 0 to 1. So you can have 1 medium machine gun, but you can't spam them. and it's as simple as that. Like I say, 10 scenarios in the book with a bonus 11th scenario, which is called Grand Maneuvers and is a 6x4 table and plays with 4 players, 2 on each side, and there are slightly different or adapted rules for how the game is played in that respect. But otherwise you're going to be playing on a 4x4 in most scenarios. The book ends with my favourite thing in the world, a quick reference sheet. So all the information is here for spotting and gameplay, including things like drawn initiative. How often in a game, when you roll to see who's got the initiative, you draw and then you roll again and you draw and you roll again and you draw and you do it 4 times and then eventually you start playing. Initiative works slightly differently, which we'll get to in a moment, but on those instances where you do draw with your opponent, you instead roll a d12 on the table and it will tell you something. Something weird has happened, whether it's a stroke of luck and players get bonus cards, or a sniper randomly starts targeting people. So it adds a bit of randomness and fog to the game that you can't be entirely certain what's happening, including for the big 12, an air attack comes in. So that's the main thrust of the book. It is 123 pages, hardback, and beautifully presented. Now, I've mentioned the dice, but as to the actual game itself, it is card-based. Now, I said this is the only thing you need to buy, and that's true. You can download the quick reference sheet and the initiative cards and all the tokens, or 2 token sheets rather, from the Studio Tomahawk website. You can buy them as well. What I will say before we get into these is the tokens on the website are actually printer friendly, so they're not as nicely graphically designed with all the delightful sort of flaming backgrounds, and that it's sort of a relatively monotone color, but it does the job, and it'll be much kinder on your ink. So, cards then, and the initiative itself. And this is another interesting part of the game. The cards that you buy or print yourself are split into 3. Technically 4. There's a bonus card deck, which is 20 cards strong. There's the initiative card, which has got Axis on one side, allies on the other, so you can track who is what, and apparently you can also flick it for randomization. I'm not sure how much I would flick it, but that is doable. And then you have your 2 initiative decks. Again, Axis and allies, or whoever happens to be playing. And these are identical, so it doesn't really matter which one I show you. But here is how the game is played. Every turn you will start with all 7 cards in your hand, plus your nation activation card. So each nation has a special ability that they can use once per turn, and when they use that, this gets discarded. And that's just a way of keeping track of it. And it might be something like, for the British, they have a morale check to remove an activated marker from a unit, because your units can only make 2 actions in a turn. And so if somebody's going to charge them, you'll want to give them that stoic boost, the stiff upper lip, and get them back in the fight so they're better prepared to defend themselves. When you take that one aside, it leaves you with 7 cards, which have a number of things to look at them. So first off, they have an initiative value from 7 through to 1 in the top right corner, and you're choosing these. So you might want to go first in a turn, in which case you're using the highest initiative you have. Or maybe you want to hold back and wait to see what your opponent's going to do and go for one of the lower numbers. So that's the initiative, and that determines which unit or units are going to be activating during the round. And then you play the cards simultaneously with your opponent. Highest initiative goes first, or chooses to go first, actually, I think it might be. And then your opponent activates their cards afterwards. So when you pick a card, you assign it to a unit. So let's say we'd pick this. Now, units can be under the command of a leader. So you might have several units within an area that an overall commander can use to their best advantage, or individual squads and teams can be given the command, or maybe there's a platoon, so a couple of squads and an officer of some description. In which case, when you play the card, you say who it's going to be used on. So I'm going to use this on a unit of Fallschirmjäger, or I'm going to use this on the platoon of British riflemen. Each team within that can only ever have 2 actions, which means if you're going to use it on an individual team within your force, in this case there are 3 actions on the card, 1 fire order and 2 maneuver orders. You can either maneuver and then fire and then maneuver, or move twice. The third action in here would be wasted. So most of the time you're going to want to play this onto an officer, and then the officer can distribute the actions between various teams and sections and squads under their control. So that's the first thing. Second thing is, if you play it on an overall commander, they get a free action that's not on the card. So it means you can use your commander then to put out actions to units within 12 inches and then move him up afterwards, or support some fire, or whatever it happens to be. You can see some of the cards go up to a substantial amount. So that's 3 activations, 4 maneuver, single initiative with 2 shoot on it. That's tactical option there. And there's one other thing you can do when you're activating. So your turn will be playing 7 cards, I believe. And when all 7 are done, that's the turnover, or when you and your opponent have both played 7 rather, which means you may end up with some units within your force not activating, or maybe everybody gets to activate because of the way you've structured your force. However, maybe you choose to fire early on and you've used up a lot of your good firing. So squad is fired, you want somebody else to be able to do this next turn. You have the option to discard a card to pull 1 back from your discard pile, not your nation special ability, but any of the other discards. So you could be sitting there and go, right, I don't really need the initiative this turn. I don't need the maneuver and the tactics. What I do need is to be able to lay down some more fire. So essentially you burn an activation. You take a turn where your card is doing nothing. It goes into the discard, and that can be pulled out instead and back to your hand for next turn. So it's not straightforward that all of your cards are always going to be used every turn. You may want to pick and choose, or you may decide that you're going to use them all as they come, essentially. The other thing are the bonus cards, and the scenario will tell you how the bonus cards work. So there are 20 bonus cards, and it's actually 10 pairs, so 10 identical types. And they can be things like bonuses to shooting. So add an additional D12 to your firing, add 2d6, add a d12 to your defense, things like that. Additional actions are also possible, so additional maneuver, additional fire and tactics, lucky bonus. So in there you'll see the duplicate cards. The scenario might tell you that whenever you finish a turn you draw a card, or you may draw a card for every objective you hold. Also very valid. The only stipulation is you can't use two cards with the same identifier on it in one particular action. So if you're being shot at and you happen to have a 2d6 and the d12, say, if you had those both in your hand, you can't play them both on the same unit at the same time. You have to pick, in which case you're probably going to go with the more reasonable d12, or maybe you want to go for the less odds but potential for stopping two incoming shots instead. The choice is yours. So again, all those cards are available to download from Studio Tomahawk's website, just in the V for Victory section, as are the token sheets. So again, these are the bought ones. They are double-sided, so one side French, one side English, but it shows you all the components that you need for the game. So we'll start off. These are double-sided. You have a red and green. See? And these are just here to mark unit activations. So the first time a unit takes an action, they get a green. The second time they take an action, they get a red. At that point, that unit is deactivated and can't be activated again that turn. And these are collected up at the end of the round, or the end of the turn. And that's just a way of marking what's going on. There's also your movement markers. So as you can see, we have the long, medium, short, very short, and a second short here. And that's because the majority of your movement for infantry uses two shorts. And they're also 45-degree angled at the end, because a lot of the stuff has essentially a pivot where you're not allowed to go over a 45-degree or a 90-degree turn, essentially. So you're moving from end to end, or in some cases you move from end to here and then use the second one to determine your squad coherency whenever you want. Nice set of objective markers here, blank on one side, well not blank but hidden on one side and numbered on the other, which allows you then to do various types of objective scenarios where there may be disguised bonus points for certain objectives. And then we also have fire tokens. So units that fired are easier to spot. It increases that spotting range simply because, people can see you firing and therefore they will fire back. The last thing to talk about is morale. And we can see here a prime example. So morale is tracked in the game by stress. And with stress, you have certain negative modifiers to your unit. So it may be when they fire, they're less combat effective. So you might suffer 2 burns right off the bat. So whenever you're firing, right away, you're either losing dice or the die are decreasing in value. There are essentially 4 states. Green is confident. Yellow is, he said, flicking it over, shaken. Orange is pinned, and then red is panicked. So when you're green, you have no modifiers, but you're not in a great way. You're starting to receive incoming damage, and you simply mark from 1 stress to 2 stress. When you would hit 3 stress, you go up a color and start on the essentially blank. And you do this again. So now you're suffering those burns to your combat effectiveness. Then you go 1 additional stress, 2 additional stress. And when you would hit a 3rd stress, you go on to your pinned. In this case, these are sort of morale negative modifiers. And again, nothing, 1, 2. And when you would hit 3, you go to panicked. And panic is not a good state to be in for your unit. So it's just a neat way of tracking those. You can quickly glance down and go, green, great. Yellow, I can live with it. Orange or red, things have gone horribly wrong for you, and you should take better care of your men. So that's sort of a very brief overview of how the game works. Card-based activations, a standardized set of morale and movement, and then the die system is a fixed 5 value, and then die are modified by type, not by score required. And that is, in a nutshell, V for victory, or 5 for victory, if you prefer. And there we have it, folks. Fascinating game. I really like the design decisions they've made, the choices to go with things like spotting is more important than weapon ranges. Some of the weapon ranges are unlimited on whatever board you're playing. The fact that you are generally playing on a 4-foot board means that rifles can reach out and touch someone across most of it. I still think the weapon ranges may be a little bit compressed. And in fact, potentially you might get away with actually running everything as unlimited and keeping to the spotting ranges instead. Can you see your opponent? Yes. Therefore, he's fair game. I like the morale system they've baked in as well, the way the tactics and command and control structure works through the cards. And it's nice that with the outlay of the book, if you don't want to get the cards and the measuring sticks and tokens and everything else, you can just go and download them yourself and, you know, print them out at home and work away that way. So it reduces the cost a bit. And I'm sure there'll be a ton of third-party producers coming along not too far down the line. They're already out there for Saga, for example. So, yeah, really good looking game. Interesting mechanics and a really quick way of building lists as well, all dependent on the scenario you're playing and the force you're bringing. So I'm really excited by this, and hopefully this will open up World War II gaming a bit further for people who maybe don't want to get bogged down in the minutiae, but still want something that's fairly representative of the sort of forces that would be fighting out these small actions. But let me know what you think below. Until next time, bye-bye.
Go ahead and check out our other content on screen now. And while you're at it, why not hit subscribe and remember to ding our dong. Go on, you know you want to click it. Go on.